Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome. I wonder what 2022 has got in store for us in terms of whiskey. And that's what tonight's vPub, the very first vPub of 2022, is going to be about. And I look forward to seeing you in a wee minute. Hello, whiskey folk. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another vPub. Welcome to another year, actually. Happy New Year. Happy 2022 to everybody. Wonderful to see you. Last week felt a wee bit strange. Obviously, Thursday night, there was no vPub. I was active and busy doing other projects and things. I was on a wee group call with some folk. But afterwards, I felt a bit odd. It was a wee bit strange. I hope you didn't mind me taking a wee break last week. And I hope you're able to distract yourself with Phil and Deepa and whatever other whiskey activity you could get up to on your spare Thursday night. It's wonderful to welcome you in here tonight. It's wonderful to kick off a new year again behind the bar. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're all doing very, very well. Remember, if you're watching this on Facebook, the chat, by the way, thank you for watching on Facebook, but you'll notice that the chat that I'm interacting with tonight is with all the barflies and the folk in the lounge here on YouTube. So they're writing my name in orange right now, or writing Aquavite. It highlights orange for me, and it means that I can pick up their comments. Thank you very much. If you do want to jump over to YouTube and chat to us there, you'll find lots and lots of welcoming, kind, generous barflies in the lounge, ready to welcome you. If you're picking up on the replay, thank you very, very much. Obviously, there's a lot to get through tonight, and I've got a very special guest on as well. So if you have a wee look underneath in the comments and in the description box underneath on YouTube, you'll find that I've put timestamps in there that's going to help you navigate through the topics and things that we speak about tonight. Before I go into the topic and cover what we're going to be talking about tonight, I'm going to jump in straight away into the lounge and welcome some of you beautiful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies. What I should have been doing, of course, is making sure that my audio and video, everything is nice and smooth. Danny Hebbington has signed up to the barflies. Welcome, Danny, my friend. Good to have your support, buddy. Okay, let's see who's trying to get my attention tonight. Okay, just as I went live, lots of orange there. Fantastic. Jimmy Legg is in, of course. Hey, we closed out with Jimmy Legg in the vPub, and we start 2022 with Jimmy in the vPub as well. Good fun. Good to see you, Jimmy. Bruno Martins is here. Jerry Miller, fantastic. Hell's Wood, first Phil Whiskey, you star. Good to see you, Phil. A happy New Year to you, my friend. I hope you're doing well. Luna Aaron, Whiskey Lover Society, fantastic. Good to see you, my friend. Gerben Blocker, Andy C, Molasses, Whiskey Geek Ben, tremendous. David Owen, Tom Skarabutska, Linsky. That looks like a new name, Linsky. Hi, genuinely huge whiskey fan here. Well, you're in genuinely huge whiskey fan territory, Linsky. Welcome, and everybody say hello to Linsky and ask what they're all about, where they are, and what they've got in the glass. Fantastic to welcome you. Christopher Malloy from New York is here. Tremendous. Max Kreitner. Hello, my friend. Hello to you and Christina and Max. I hope you're all doing very, very well. Fantastic to see you, buddy. Watchman 999 is in. Pete Head, Dave Cummins, Time for a Dram, Gregor, Max Smith, Neil Laverty in Ireland, Ren, what's in all those Glen Cairns and Copitas? Well, for me tonight, I'll tell you Ren. I wonder if that's a new name, Ren. I'll tell you what's in my glass. It was one of my top 5 whiskies of last year. I've been really enjoying this at the start of the year. The reachability, or I'm having difficulty reaching past it. That is a Speyburn 15-year-old, naturally presented. I only paid £48 or something like that. It's kind of, I think the retail is about mid-50s. But I notice in most of the retailers, there are a couple of retailers that still have it in stock, but I notice a few retailers have gone out of stock on it, and I hope that that's not because of any discontinuation or anything, that it's just recently dropped out of stock. But I think it's just a fantastically fruity, rich, tremendous whiskey, and I talked about it at length last year in December. It's terrific stuff, Ren, but it's nice to welcome you in. Jean Delacosine is in, fantastic. Jimmy Jazz is here as well. Falsgraf, good to see you, Falsgraf. Always tremendous to welcome you in. Dan Fordham, Jeff Whiskey, Roland, Whiskey Radar, Benny Fries. So many of you, over 250, and we're only just a couple of minutes in. It's wonderful to kick off a whiskey year with all of you wonderful whiskey folk. Oops, Jimmy Legs bought me a wee dram. Really looking forward to hearing from Ingvar again. Thanks for having him on. Yeah, I've already mentioned to Ingvar, you know, he'd made a commitment when he was on. We would realize it was back in 2020 he was on. That it was great fun, and we were definitely going to do it again. But you know what it's like for me? I have to, if I'm bringing in a guest, I kind of want to kind of get as much out of the guest, and there's always a story, there's always something that they can bring, a different perspective, an angle, or an interest. For Ingvar, it was a little bit different. It was what he's been responsible for. The Malt Whisky Yearbook was the topic of the 2020 appearance. But if I was going to bring Ingvar back again, I wanted a topic that might excite him, something that he would be keen to kind of ponder and contribute with. And then I realized that Ingvar is a little bit like us in that he's passionate about whiskey, but he doesn't work for any specific brand. He doesn't have any defined, very, very specific surgical role in a particular organization. Ingvar is putting together a publication that covers the whole spectrum of malt whiskey. So in a lot of ways, there's a lot of synergy there with us. Maybe none of the knowledge, none of the interest, none of the specific tasks are particularly deep, but they're certainly wide. So it made sense for us either to summarize a year or potentially look forward to a year. So when I spoke to Ingvar last year, that is what we decided to do. So this has been in the diary, in the calendar for a wee while now, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you tonight. What I'm speaking about, of course, is this kind of, we're in this environment, we're in this lovely space where we enjoy our whiskies, and we become really quite attached to this product because it's a very emotive thing. It's something that connects with all of our senses and really kind of draws us in. It's quite a compelling proposition. So it's easy to understand why people could become passionate about it. It's easy how people can become really, really, you know, we could talk about being down rabbit holes. We could talk about having our head in books constantly. We could talk about all of that, but we do become very, very geeky. So it makes sense that we would want to consider things. We would want to start to plan and strategize and consider where we're going to go next, what we're going to explore next, what's on the horizon, what have we got to look forward to? Are we going to be able to buy these whiskies? Are they going to look the same? Are they going to taste the same? And probably the biggest thing that we'll talk about tonight, is it going to cost the same? So when we look forward to 2022, I think what we want to do is consider how 2020, 21 and 2021 has gone for us, and use that as a little bit of a frame of reference to look forward to 2022 and imagine what the year ahead might hold for us. Because it's true that things are getting more expensive. And I went out to the community to ask for questions and things that were on their mind that they might want to put to us this evening. And they sent it in, and you can imagine that most of the topics were certainly about price. But I think there's a lot of internet rumors and nonsense going around and a lot of fear mongering out there. I don't think it's going to be quite as bad as we imagine, although no doubt recent years have shown us that it can be a really difficult thing, especially when things go out of reach for us. However, there's going to be some positivity to share tonight. This is the vPub. If we have to tackle something that's negative, if we have to kind of do, then fine. But tonight we're going to try and look forward and say, this is a marvelous thing. Where's the positivity? Where's the good things? Where can we get together as a community and discover where the value lies? What are we excited about seeing this year? And if some products, the price goes out of our reach, then we just walk away and we find other products, because there's always lots of whiskey. The 5 things I'm going to talk about tonight is the movement of premiumization, what's happening there. And that's kind of luxury goods placement, but at premiumization also, not just to speak to somebody with lots of money, but to speak to somebody who's really keen on natural presentation. So premiumization, upping the quality, upping the value proposition. So it's not just about branding and positioning there, it's often about more natural presentation as well. That's a trend that's happening. We're going to talk about availability. Now, this is something that's been very, very acute in the last couple of years because of because of the lockdown, because of a booming interest in whiskey. For lots of reasons, availability has become a real issue for us. So we're going to talk a wee bit about that and kind of give our ideas about what we see happening in 2022. We're also going to talk about threats, potential other challengers that might be on the horizon, whether it's new distilleries, world whiskies, whatever it may be. We're going to talk about shifting values, that ability to decide, okay, I can't afford this anymore. I can't find this in my retailer anymore. So we move that promiscuity, that ability to work together to find where the next exciting, interesting thing is. And the fifth thing, of course, is that really, really salty topic of price. If you're trying to get my attention, please just type Aquaviti and I'll do my best to pick it up throughout this evening. Helmswood is saying, oh, I hope not. Spending has gone mad already and we're only 2 weeks into 2022. New Year's resolutions weren't set, and if they were, Helen, it looks like you've already broken them. Listen, you're preaching to the converted. Don't worry about it. Sugar Kitty is in saying Ren is on some US bourbon channels. Fantastic. Thanks for Sugar Kitty. Thanks for letting us know, and nice to welcome you in, Ren. Jason McDonald is saying, evening, Roy. Always great to see Ingvar and the vPub. I agree, Jason. Good to welcome you as well. And Chris, my friend Chris, is saying, evening, Aquaviti. Apologies for my lack of attendance recently. There is no such thing for apologising for lack of attendance at the vPub. Don't worry about it, Chris. It's nice to welcome you in this evening. And Ren is saying, hi there. I don't make it to most of Aquaviti's live streams, but I always at least catch the replay. Ren, thank you so much for doing that. It's wonderful to have you here. And Falscraft is saying, availability for particular whiskies, yes, sometimes is a problem. But as you say, availability of whiskey as such is definitely available. That's right. That's right. And I think that's going to probably be a theme of 2022, Falscraft as well. Helen is saying resolutions went right out the window on the 6th. Lol. We can't find a rare Doc is saying, hi, Helen. Hi, Bruno. Hi, all. Good to see you, Doc. It's wonderful to welcome you. And my friend Jimmy Legacy saying, I'm reading Whiskey Fun from 10 years ago. And everyone was complaining about whiskey prices then. Nothing changes. It is true. It is absolutely true. Some interesting things. But one of the worst things you can do, Jimmy, is go back to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and look at the prices and looking at the product that was available then. I mean, if hindsight had 2020 vision, right? Ben Welding is saying it. Even Aquaviti, the Deanston 18 is open. Ben, fantastic. I hope you're enjoying it, and you can let me know how you're getting on with it. And Mr. Grilling, that looks like a new name as well. In Mexico, we can't get too many whiskies, and the prices depends on the exchange of the US dollar. Yeah, a lot of the topics that we're going to talk tonight are going to be territory dependent if we talk about availability and price and distribution and things like that. It's definitely a dynamic, and it may be a wee bit different from where you are. But a lot of the things that you see happening here often eventually ripples out into the wider market. Nice to welcome you in, Mr. Grilling. Kim Grant on Whiskey. Cousin Kevin is here. Was lost last week, but watched your Isla video, and it put me back in the mood to get back this year, and it made it even more of a priority to pack Factor 50. That's right. It was it tends to be really sunny when I'm in Isla. And Whiskey Real Roland is saying, some few days ago, I received my first bottle of 8687 Clynelish. Oh, wow. I don't know how you managed to do that. There can't be many of those still out there in the wild, Roland. I think you're going to love it, my friend. Whiskey Weekend Drama saying Glendronach 15 for €40 back then. €40. That was back in the Billy Walker days, wasn't it, Harrow? And Graham Murphy saying, tried the Bowmore Edition 1 after last year's blind extravaganza. I'm very glad I did. It's a wonderful Bowmore. You're talking about the Atlantic Sea Salt Vaults Edition 1. Terrific stuff. I'm glad you're enjoying it. Everwind is here. Good to see Everwind. When did greed stop being a sin? Sadly, aged single malts are a luxury product. Life was simpler when I drank just to get a buzz, or in college to get a drink. Hey. Well, that is true. That is absolutely the case. And what we have to remember is this: we're not entitled to any of these things. We're not entitled to getting them at any particular price. But that's not going to stop us complaining when we see cynical things or big step changes in price and all of that kind of thing. We're going to still talk about it. You're right, it was simpler back then. But would you trade it? I would maybe trade the youth. I would like to be a bit younger. But what I get from whiskey, from malt whiskey today, the appreciation, the tasting, more than the drinking, is a much, much better place to be. Much more enjoyable. Shelton Almeida is in. Shelton, so good to see you, my friend. Happy New Year, Shelton. I think you're a local now, aren't you, living up here in Scotland? You need to let me know how your life and career changes are going, my friend. Wonderful to welcome you into the vPub. Danny Hebington is saying, my resolution is not to go so daft on the auctions and know when to say not worth it and try something else. Okay, we're 15 minutes in. I want to just jump straight in and welcome my friend Ingvar. We all know Ingvar Ronde. You'll recognise his picture from inside the Malt Whisky Yearbook. This is my well-thumbed copy of the 2022 version. It's already got lots of notes in it. It's always scribbled and it's spilled upon, it's torn, it's rolled up and thrown into pockets and things. I love this thing, and I have loved it for all the years I've been buying it. My copies go back to, I've got some earlier copies, but I've been buying it religiously since about 2013, 2014. And when I reached out to Ingvar originally, it was to celebrate this book. But when I realised just how much opinion and how much breadth of knowledge Ingvar has because of the role he plays and because of how passionate he is about whiskey, I wanted to harness some of that in a vPub. This is a perfect example to reach out, or a perfect topic to reach out to Ingvar. And if he's in good shape, he is there, I'll bring in a friend over in Sweden now and say, welcome, Ingvar. How are you?
Hi, Roy. I'm fine.
Good.
Good to be back. Good to be back in the companionship of this entire crowd here. I watched your show just before New Year's Eve on the 30th.
Yes.
And I noticed that Jimmy Legg, he said why he enjoyed to be a part of this. Because everybody here, they are so passionate about the same thing, and everyone, they are so welcoming, and you realize that nobody will say anything bad here. It's just welcoming, it's hospitality, it's passion, as you said, positivity. So yeah, great to be back.
Whiskey demands it, Ingvar. Whiskey demands it, right?
Yeah.
It's wonderful to welcome you back. And I have to say, Jimmy Legg would have been one of the very vocal supporters and people in the community that's saying, when is Ingvar coming back again? You know, that was a great show when he was on, because we're able to talk about everything outside of the book and what drove you to creating the book and everything in the first place. But if I pick up your Whisky Yearbook, it's fantastic for the stats. It's fantastic to keep me up to speed with everything that's happening in malt all around the world. Huge focus on Scotch malt, of course.
Yeah.
But the book is, if you pardon the pun, it's bookended, isn't it? It's got editorial opinion pieces in there. It's got topics, studies in there. And it ends with the year that was, data, everything. So we can not just kind of work out where we want to go next in whiskey, but also from your book, understand a bigger picture about where whiskey's come from and where potentially it's going.
Yeah.
So that it's a fantastic thing. Some of the best articles you'll read in a whiskey year is in the Malt Whisky Yearbook. It's wonderful. But it's often very contemplative and reflective, isn't it? You talk about the crunchy things like availability, like price, like the challengers that we could see in the future. All of these things are covered in the yearbook. Do these things play on your mind much in the same way that the barflies that are in the lounge tonight? You're still fundamentally, first and foremost, a whiskey fan, and you're affected by these things, yes?
Yeah, I mean, that's why I started doing the book in 2005, because I'm passionate about whiskey. That was my hobby. That was my interest. So I'm very much in the same mood as everyone else here. But of course, since I started doing the book, I have to also look at the bigger picture, talking about the development of the big companies, marketing, pricing, and stuff like that. But what I especially like is, and you mentioned it, going back to the history to see how did we end up here? Because, and that's not just about whiskey for me. It's about life in a general sense. There is always a reason why we're here at this particular time doing this particular thing.
Yes.
You can always find an answer in history. And it's the same with the whiskey. Someone here, I don't know who it was, said that, yeah, 20 years ago, we were talking about whiskey prices. Probably 40 years ago, we were talking about the whiskey prices going too high. So that's nothing new.
Yes.
But that's not the reason why we shouldn't discuss it, of course. But history repeats itself, of course.
Yeah. It was Jimmy Legg that mentioned that as well. He'd been looking at the
was.
prices in Whiskey Fun.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've got some friends that will occasionally turn up a document or a price list from the past. And it's interesting to see something from 100 years ago, but it's eye-watering to see something from only 10 or 15 years ago. That's when it smarts, because you can see that the price has increased much more than the general cost of living, I would say. But there's also an argument, Ingvar, that I'll talk about a wee bit later when we talk about price, that maybe when you come out of post-1980s depression of whiskey, let's say, the whiskey loch, whiskey was too cheap. With the benefit of hindsight, you were able to pick up real bargains. And I don't think that's the yardstick that we should be measuring today's whiskey against.
No, you're absolutely right. And talking about that, because the old whiskey geeks like you and I and people who came into whiskey in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we always talk about, when we talk to newcomers, oh, you should have been interested in whiskey in the 1990s. Then you could buy a Glenmore or Milburn or Ban for nothing. So that was a time to be alive as a whiskey enthusiast. Yes, of course it was. But this is very much a perfect time to be alive as a whiskey enthusiast. This is the best time in whiskey. I mean,
I talk about it regularly. Yeah.
And I'm thinking of all the new distilleries in Scotland, for instance. I mean, we have at least 35 new distilleries since I started doing the book. And most of these have now released whiskies. And these distilleries are so interesting. I mean, if you take them one by one, you look at the likes of Knocknean. Annabelle Thomas is doing some amazing stuff with different types of yeast. You have Torra Vague, and they invite 8 or 9 distillers every year to do their specific Torra Vague, as long as it's not a typical Torra Vague. So they invite innovation. You have Bernard Benny, one of the newest distilleries.
Yes.
You're working on roasted malts. Okay, roasted malt, that's not a new thing. Glenmorangie, Balvenie, they've done it occasionally. But Bernard Benny, they're thriving on this. There's something in the flavor of roasted malts. And you have Westland, of course, in Seattle doing it. So all these new distilleries are doing some amazing things. And I tried quite a few of the new releases from them. Some are fantastic already. Some are promising. Some are not that fantastic. But anyway, we have so much to choose from. So in my mind, this is the best time to be alive if you're a whiskey enthusiast.
I agree fully. And I think, Ingvar, you've been around the vPub long enough to know that I tend to try really hard to lean on the most optimistic or positive side of things, because I do feel that while there are some challenges, while there is cynicism from time to time, generally speaking, we are all very, very happy to be having discovered this amazing spirit, the flavor, the variety that it can give us. And most of us have found it to be an enhancement to our lives. So I think that as soon as you realize that optimism then starts to make you become almost, it's a human condition, pessimistic. You start to worry, how can I preserve this? How can this sustain? How can I make sure I can still buy this at the same price or the best price? I'll buy one and an extra one. I'll put that on the shelf. So you start to try to fortify that feeling. And I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes into it. If we talk about what you mentioned there with Bernard Benny, what they're doing is that differentiator in there with the roasted malt, the chocolate malt, to try and bring something that's really quite different as part of their identity, because they realize 35 distilleries, as you mentioned, in this millennium alone. By the time we reach 2025, it's going to be 50, I think, is the projection.
I'm sure,
it's going to be tough for you to keep up, right, with the yearbook.
Well, that's what I do.
I think all of them have this challenge of differentiation, and I see if we've grab the first topic now, this premiumization, and inevitably that's going to overlap into a lot of the other things that we're going to talk about, right? Price and availability and things.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing a shift. And I think it's fully down to the knowledge base of the consumer. The customer is informed like never before. So putting things like natural presentation on the label, I think is now become a vehicle to premiumize a whiskey. It wasn't something to differentiate it from mass market, or perhaps it has been in the past, but now they're seeing that in 2022 alone, I can easily count half a dozen big players that have changed from not mentioning anything about colour or chill filtration to putting that prominently on the label. And every new distillery, with very few exceptions, are going the very same route. Do you see this kind of premiumization being something that's going to continue? Do you think there's a value sell there?
I think there is. I mean, I think we discussed part of it last year as well, because I mean, we're used to be able to read about what's in every piece of food we stick into our mouth, and description on the packaging, and we absolutely need that on whiskey as well.
Yes.
And the question is, when it comes to Scotch whiskey, how much will the rules allow for the producers to display? And that's partly up to the SWA, of course, Scotch Whisky Association. And there was a battle started by Compass Box and Bruichladdich a couple of years ago, when they tried to be as clear as possible on the packaging, and they couldn't. So what they did, they said that put the question on our website and we'll answer it. And that was one way of being honest and have a full disclosure of what's in the bottle. I doubt if the SWA can keep on that, doing that for the next few years, because for all obvious reasons, you should be able to say on the label what's in the bottle.
Yep.
What was that?
While you were talking there, in the background, I muted the mic while I was taking the wrapper off and things. I'm opening a bottle, and it might come into the discussion tonight. I don't know, but this is a release from Bimber. Actually, they offered me a free sample of it, and I said no thanks. I've already bought a bottle, but I do want to talk about it because it's a category I was excited about, and I think we will talk about it tonight. But I have no. This is the first time I'm trying this tonight. Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, the SWA have got their work cut out, but I mean, I think that if the SWA doesn't have any complaints about people suggesting whether or not caramel color has been used on the label, or whether it's been gone through chill filtration or not. Sorry, Jimmy Leggs bought me a wee dram, and he's going back to what we talk about the pricing. But a lot of us have whiskey from 10 or 20 years ago that we got for great prices. Why don't we talk about that more? That's right, but there is a huge element, Jimmy, isn't there, of nostalgia with it. And short of a time machine, not only are we not going to get those prices, Jimmy, but we're not going to get the same whiskies, because even if we buy the exact same whiskey 15 years ago versus the same whiskey today, there's going to be drift. It's going to be something different. But buddy, I do appreciate your dram. Thank you so much. He's saying, seems to me that a lot of distilleries are creating and releasing supermarket whiskey quietly and shouting more about the integrity product. Maybe that's just my perspective. There is a dichotomy there. There is the volumes and the low margin and the price point whiskies that price sensitive environments like supermarkets, maybe some areas of duty free, things like that, that are going to be whiskies that are not going to excite us a lot. We need to, I think, accept that that's part of the whiskey landscape.
Roy, it seems to me that actually we're getting into the pricing discussion already now, aren't we?
It's inevitable.
So why don't I? Because just before we came on stream here, we were talking about, because I saw that show on the 30th of December, and you presented your favorite whiskies of the year, And I told you, wow, I would like to do that as well. And you
Good.
came up with your number one, Deanston 18-year-old, which
Yes.
is a fabulous, fabulous whiskey, which I thoroughly enjoy. And then
Good.
I realized that you can get that at the Whiskey Exchange for £65. If I buy
Yes.
it here in Sweden, it's £100.
Wow.
So
Yes.
that will have part of the pricing discussion. But anyway, so my top three affordable whiskies of 2021.
That would be fantastic. Are you going to share it now?
Absolutely. So, third place, a distillery that was so neglected by the previous owner because it was only used for their blends. It was used for famous grouse and Catisac, so now everybody can take a guess.
Yes.
It's obviously Tamdu. When Ian MacLeod bought that 6-7 years ago, they did something great with it, as they did with Glengoyne when they bought that. And
Yes.
I
Both
hope they
from
will do
Edrington. Yeah.
something similar with Rosebank. But anyway, Tamdu 15-year-old is one of my favorites during 2021. I think it's 80 quid or something. So it's not that cheap, but it's a tremendous, nicely sherried whiskey, which I enjoy very much. Number two, and here
So
I'm trying
specifically the
with
Tamdu 15-year-old, yes.
Tamdu 15-year-old.
It was actually in the running for my Whiskey of the Year 2019. So
It
I was
was.
so struck with it. I was, yes.
Yeah.
And what we have to remember when we look at age statements, and we started to talk about this a lot in 2022, Ingvar, you can use that age statement as a point of reference, but don't judge the whiskey. It's not the be all and end all. Look at the price of the whiskey and judge it as a £65 whiskey
Yeah.
rather than a 15-year-old whiskey.
Yeah.
Then it can stand up to its peers a little bit better. And the Tamdu 15 was a very strong performer. Absolutely, I agree with you. A good dram. Good pick.
My runner-up before the first place is actually from your producer of the year, Glen
Nice.
Cadam. And I chose Reserva Andalusia, which is at £38.
Yes.
Great whiskey. And I thoroughly agree with you with Glen Cadam. They seldom go wrong. They make some fantastic whiskies. So that Reserva
Fantastic.
Andalusia.
So the Reserva Andalucia, for anybody that's watching, is one of their entry-level products, but it's very sherry focused. And as Ingvar said, sub £40 for a sub 46% naturally presented sherry style whiskey as well. Super, Ingvar, yes.
And no age statement, I know that, but
yeah,
that usually that doesn't bother me. I mean, it's great whiskey. So my number one, that's from a distillery that was taken over by a great whiskey producer, great man, so many years of experience in the whiskey business. And he took over that distillery probably 12 years ago, together with a couple of South African investors. So I'm talking about Billy Walker, of course. I'm talking about Ben Riach. And my favorite there is in the new range is Ben Riach, the 12. 48.95 last time I checked at the Whiskey Exchange. And I realized that what Billy did with Ben Riach 10 years ago was tremendous. He revitalized a almost closed distillery. It was closed for some time.
Yes.
He pissed off a lot of whiskey enthusiasts by throwing out new expressions, 20, 25 new expressions every year. So it was absolutely impossible at some time to keep track of what's new, what's happening, what's gone, because next month there were 10 new expressions. So, as you all know, Billy sold Ben Riach, Glen Ronde, Glen Glasser to Brown-Forman a few years ago. And he did a good job. But when Rachel Barry entered as master blender, I think she did something really, really great, because when they, a year and a half ago, when they reissued the core range.
Yes.
The core range. She could have just made it easy on herself, releasing a 10, 12, 15, 18, 21. Just adding the years, maybe spill some more sherry butts into some of the older whiskies. She didn't do that. She went all in, and I had to write it down. Just listen to it. The original 10 is a classic bourbon sherry. Smoky 10, bourbon rum maturation. Original 12, PX and port. Smoky 12, bourbon, sherry and marsala. 21-year-old, Bordeaux, smoky and not smoky whiskies. 25, Madeira, smoky and not smoky whiskies. And the 30-year-old also includes virgin oak. So either you like this experimentation, this playing around with different casks, or you don't. I do. And I think Rachel Berry, she took the difficult path here when revamping an entire core range and really playing with all these different casks that she had. And most of them, I think, are really, really great. And the 12 at 48.95, brilliant whiskey. I love it.
Yeah. It's an interesting point that you make as well, is that sometimes we can fall into a wee bit of a rut where we can look at the maturation and decide that we're probably maybe not going to like it because we've tried a wine finish before. We didn't really take to the wine finishes. A Madeira was too sweet. PX was too sickly, these kind of things. But what you often have to do is you have to go on other people that you trust, people that you enjoy drinking whiskey with and sharing it with, because it's a bit like the age statement. If you just look at the age statement or the maturation and you're not doing it alongside tasting the whiskey, you're doing yourself and the whiskey a disservice, I think, because writing Madeira as part of the maturation is how much Madeira? Was it a small proportion vatted in, or was it a finishing cask, or was it what? We really need to get past this I like, I don't like, don't we? We need to kind of learn to let the whiskey lead us a little bit, and the Rachel Barrys or whoever it is. What's your vision here? You've got a 25-year-old product and you've got Madeira going on. Now, I know that you haven't, it's unlikely that you've aged the whole anything for 25 years in Madeira. So I understand what's the proposition here. So you taste it, absolutely. And obviously I've tried the 10, the standard 10, and I tried the smoky 12 from Benriach. And I think that, you talked about Benriach being closed. So we're going to see that gap in stock for a little while as well. It's a challenge for them. But they've set their new branding up. It's much more plain, much more clean and simple. I think that hopefully we're going to see that moving forward. And what I was curious about it, Ingvar, is that they brought out the 43% versions for us and 46% version. Slight different in price, but not too much. I thought that was an interesting way to kind of balance that thing. So, it's going to be interesting to see where Benriach goes. So they've obviously, would they be, what's your producer then? Do you have a producer of 2021 as well?
Well, I was thinking of Benriach, but you think of a company like, so I won't say Brown-Forman, but I could say my usual choice, the one distillery, the one producer that very rarely lets me down, and I believe I said that last time, and that's Glenmorangie. I mean, especially what they're doing with Glenmorangie, and I still think that they're doing some good things with Ardbeg. I know. I'm sure that Ardbeg has lost a few followers in the past 5, 6, 7 years because either it's been too experimental for their taste, or they have become too expensive, or so. But that's always the problem if you're a distiller with dedicated followers.
Yes.
You're so close to losing them if you do something that is not up to their taste. And Ardbeg, I mean, it has had that position for 15 years at least now. at least since Glen took over. So it's a delicate balance for Bill Lumsden to know exactly what he should do and shouldn't do. And he knows very well, I think, that he will at some time lose some enthusiasts, but he will gain some new.
I think that
new customers.
neither Glenmorangie or Ardbeg are nervous about 2022, right? I think that they're set up in a very clean, clear, brand orientated way. Glenmorangie, for more or less the brands, it's the range, the core range is very easy to understand. Everything is based around that 10-year-old core product. They've got some experimental things, really an interesting separate little micro distillery bolted on the side to do their experimentation as well. And they've got the 12-year-olds and recently bumped up to a 14-year-old for it was the Quinta Ruban, wasn't it? That was raised to a 14-year-old. And so they've got quite a clear core range. I think Ardbeg do kind of for every dozen fans that they attract to that image and that brand, there's maybe a dozen that maybe they isolate a little bit because of the vibe, the feeling, and the almost kind of tribe-like branding. But for me and in my environment, I'm always trying to push beyond the brand, beyond the label image, to really. That's why blind challenges and blind tasting is such a big part of what I enjoy about whiskey, because it strips that kind of thing away. And there have been times that I've had my face inside a glass of Ardbeg and thought, this is wonderful, what is this? And it's Ardbeg, it's like, oh. And it teaches you just to kind of try to not judge. There's a theme building here, don't judge too much by the label, right?
And the thing is, Roy, I mean, if there are some enthusiasts who don't like Wee Beastie because it's too young, or they don't like the 8-year-old committee release now, there will always be Ardbeg 10. There will always, I think, for some time now, there will be Ugadal if they want that. It's the same way with there will always be Lagavulin 16 for those who want that. If they hate a young Lagavulin at 8 years old, then don't buy it. But you will always have Lagavulin 16-year-old. But there's some enthusiasts, they almost feel offended. Even though they can still buy the Lagavulin 16, they feel offended if Diageo releases an 8-year-old, because they don't think that Lagavulin should be drunk at an 8-year-old.
And it's almost like the brand becomes an enemy of itself, right? It's the legacy. It's difficult for them to move away. I mean, Lefroy have always kind of based their everything around that core 10-year-old. Lagavulin have always had that 16-year-old, so they're saddled with that legacy, as you point out. And it can be absolutely challenging. Eric Cunliffe has bought us a wee dram. Ingvar, he said, Happy New Year, Roy. A great way to start the vPub with such a high caliber guest. Ingvar always brings a delightful balance of relaxation and wisdom. My kind of vPub. That's Eric Cunliffe in Canada. Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for your dram and kind words.
Great to hear. Great to hear.
I mean, do you see...
Sorry, Roy.
Go.
Because it strikes me now, you asked me for a producer of the year.
I did, yes.
I have one.
Share.
White Mackay.
Oh, wow. Now, I have a theory about this. Go, please share. Please share.
Okay. So,
wow.
I think what they've been doing with two extremely neglected distilleries, and I'm talking about Tamnavulin and Fettercan.
Yes.
I think they did something really good there. I'm still a bit hesitant about Fettercan, but I've come to terms with it, and I like their new 16-year-old, or rather new. But what they did with Tamnavulin, completely neglected distillery. I mean, nobody knew about it. Yes, some who had traveled Speyside realized that going south from Glenlivet, they passed Tamnavulin, they saw the sign, terrible looking distillery, and they just drove on, maybe down to Tomintal. But terrible whiskey. And all of a sudden, of course, there was a plan. It wasn't all of a sudden. But then we could find Tamnavulin double cask, I think it's called. That's good dram And then they released the wine finishes. I think it was Cabernet Sauvignon, Grenache, and Pinot Noir. And in Sweden, Tamnavulin was completely unknown, and it took 12 months, and it became the most sold single malt in Sweden in a year. In a year.
And that was because they had the balance of easy drinking, approachable whiskies at a good price point, right? Because there were in the UK, I don't know, in Sweden and the UK, these were £20, £30 whiskies maximum. They were inexpensive. And I remember doing a blind challenge using a Tamnavulin in the lineup when one of the first videos that this channel ever put out, Ingvar, back in 2017. And the Tamnavulin surprised us all. We were snobs about Tamnavulin because it was a cheap supermarket whiskey. And we decided, you know what? And we knew from speaking to our friends who were exploring whiskey, starting out in whiskey, looking for gateway experiences, not wanting to spend a lot of money because they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't have the confidence or the conviction to spend. So they were being safe. They bought Tamnavulin. And Tamnavulin was in cabinets up and down the country, converting people into the wonders of single malt. Now, maybe one day they learn that it's chill filtered and it's colored and all of these things, 40%. You know, it's still, there is a place for that whiskey. Yes,
absolutely. And I think the amazing development in Sweden was very much due to the price. I mean, it's here in Sweden, £30 for a single malt. That's really, really cheap.
Yes,
and I think they made a very sound decision. White Mackay, they brought in, and this is very much due to Greg Glass, who they stole from Compass Box a few years ago to be the next Richard Patterson. So he was working alongside with Richard for 5 or 6 years. He got something to do with Jura, did some great stuff there. And now it seems to me that Richard has more or less left all the whiskies except for Dalmore. That's his baby, in the same way that David Stewart, he left Glenfiddich and took care of Balvenie.
Yes.
So Greg is now very much responsible for the other three, Jura, Tamnavulin, and Fettercan, and he's a great blender. He's what he did with Compass Box for many years. I know you like Compass Box. Spice Tree was one of your 5 favorites last year.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like Compass Box.
And I have to say, I'm a fan of Greg Glass. I've only tried a couple of the Whiskey Works expressions, but that was his experimental. He was stretching his legs. A couple of them were out of my price comfort zone, but not all of them. But these were interesting things, and there was a story behind everyone. And, you know, what's happened recently, you're talked about Tamnavulin. Let me take up the other one on Fettercairn, okay? The 16-year-old, I did not get along with. It was just too sickly for me. It's still here, and it's still available for anybody that wants to come and swap it with me. However, they've brought out the new 16-year-old in December last year, Ingvar. 46.4% ABV, nice big juicy 16-year-old age statement on there, the same price as previously, £65, and they've slapped on the label natural colour and unchill filtered.
Yep.
Now, based on the wonderful experience I've had with their Warehouse 2 release, which if you're nervous about Fettercairn, I understand why. Not just from the official releases potentially, but some indies were a bit ropey as well in the past. Try and get your hands on that Warehouse 2 release. It's just wonderful. And the tropical element of Fettercairn is the thing that is most forward. It's just wonderful. And there's a uniqueness to it as well that's not everywhere. I think it is a wee bit down to Greg Glass. It's a wee bit down to him kind of dragging things and pushing things in a different direction. And if that is the case, then it's another thing to be looking forward to. If we can take under the radar distilleries like the Tamnavulins from White Mackay, the Fettercairns from White Mackay, and bring wonderful whiskies, because I guarantee you the people that work there know how wonderful the whiskey they make is. What's not often the case is when we buy it and pour it from the bottle.
Yeah.
That would be something to look forward to, right?
Absolutely. I agree. I totally agree. But the problem is, because a lot of people who had who enjoyed or drank Tamnavulin or Jura or Fetcan 10 years ago, they won't touch it today because they don't want to go back. There are so many other whiskies. Why should I buy something that I hated 10 years ago? And I remember we discussed this last time I was on the show. We were talking about Edward Dow. We were talking about Loch Lomond. And I know one of your 5 was Loch Lomond. And
Yes.
I've been talking about that a lot. You have to sometimes go back to these whiskies that you didn't like or sometimes that you hated to see, has anything changed? Did I change on my palate, or did the whiskey change? And definitely with Loch Lomond and Edward and Jura, I think so. And now it's time for Tamnavulin and Fetcan. But it takes, I mean, it's difficult for producers they have to find new consumers. It's difficult to find these old whiskey drinkers who said, I will never touch a Tamnavulin again.
It's one of the things that whiskey is teaching me, that the distilleries that I didn't bond with, that I didn't love, I need to keep an open mind. Whiskey constantly teaches. Ingvar, I once stood up and told my friend that I didn't like whiskey, and I couldn't help him take a tour of a distillery in Scotland. Okay, he was visiting from Italy, and he was shocked. So this the reason I'm here is that discussion. Yeah. And I said, I don't like. And whiskey continually teaches me not to say I don't like. What you think you don't like and what you actually don't like are not always the same things.
No.
And it's only when you're afforded an opportunity to strip away the preconceptions, and whiskey is very good at doing that. I think these themes are going to continue throughout the night, but I've got some questions here from the community. And as you're speaking there, as you're talking, it's prompting some of these questions. Benny Fries has given one that talks about price shift in values and availability. So in this one question, he's covering 3 of the things that we're talking about tonight. And he says, when talking about availability and so on price levels, I can't help thinking about your vPubs, about ignored whiskies. That's exactly what we're talking about, including under-the-radar distilleries with available core-range products. These may become more relevant and interesting than we ever thought already in 2022. But he's specifically asking you, does Ingvar have any input on these, or what would he look for when the Springbank shelf is almost always empty at the local whiskey dealer? What is his take on hidden gems among existing established distilleries? Well, I think we've touched on there's always going to be whiskey. But that's a good thing he brings up. We're coming to the terms with, everybody knows about Springbank now. Everybody knows how wonderful it is, how different it can be, how varied, how densely flavored it is. All of these great things. But it means nothing if we can't walk into the shop and buy it, if we've got to fight to get our hands on it. If Benny said to you, Ingvar, what would you buy if you couldn't get your hands on a Springbank in 2022? I hope that some of the stock's going to stick. I believe that we're going to see more stock sticking on the shelf in 2022. That is optimism. However, one of the things that will help that is, what would you pick as an alternative?
I guess it doesn't help. If I can't get Springbank, I try to look for Klein Leach. But what does that help? Because we can't find Klein Leach at a decent price these days. That's maybe my favorite distillery of all times. If you buy a bottling from Scotch Malt Whisky Society, now and again you can find it still there. They are expensive. I keep looking for Linkwood from independent bottlers.
Nice, yeah.
I get so much from Linkwood, whether it's a bourbon maturation or sherry maturation or a mix. But something it's so difficult because Springbank is so iconic. So for me to choose what is the next Springbank, that's so difficult. I'm talking about the quite unknown here, about Tamnavulin but they are that's a different league. We're talking about very low price, decently made whiskies, absolutely fine, but not astonishing. We always have to remember that we can recommend a whiskey, but it doesn't have to be fantastic.
Well, I think every Springbank we taste today has been made purely for the purpose of being sold as a single malt, whereas that's not the case for Tam the Vulans and people out there. Gordon Dundas is actually in tonight. Gordon, good to see you. He's saying, evening all, Ingvar. Great to see you. I'm glad you enjoyed the Tamdu 15. Good to see you in, Gordon. I hope you're keeping well. Jean de la Cuisine is saying, in my humble opinion, Ben Romack is a good substitute for Springbank. That's an interesting one. Yash Desai is echoing and saying, yes, Ben Romack. Ben Romack is often talked about being the Springbank of Speyside. I fully, one of my predictions for 2022 is Ben Romack is going to just go all out and start to present things naturally. That they don't need this chill filtered price point whiskey anymore. It's Ben Romack literally is the Springbank of Speyside, and we would celebrate it and shout about it.
I think Ben Romack, that's a good choice, and one of the reasons for that, I think, is that they have it's a small owner. It's Gordon MacPhail, and for the same reason, and not just because Gordon is on the show, but it's the same with Ian MacLeod. And I thoroughly think that, and that's one of the reasons I chose Tamdu 15-year-old as my second runner-up last year. I think Ian MacLeod can do something really tremendous with. They are already doing it. What I'm wishing for there is a slightly broader range. Right now, we have just
sherry, yeah.
Yeah, but and then we have the Dramballi Dram. That's just during the festival and only available at the distillery at sometimes. So we need a broader range, and Tamdu, I think they are doing the right thing. It should be about sherry. Maybe it should be about different cherries. Maybe it should be about PX, Oloroso, Amontillado, Palo Cortado. So
I agree with you, but one of my favourite Glengoynes ever was I mean, it wasn't exclusively ex-bourbon, it was the 15-year-old. And I know that they're struggling, but there's a stock issue there potentially, but that's temporarily, I hope it's temporarily gone, but I love the creaminess, I love the balance of the 15-year-old. A friend actually recently gifted me a bottle of the 15-year-old because in his neighbourhood over there in continental Europe, it was still available, whereas it's gone from here. I would like to see more. I know that Ian MacLeod have things like Smokehead as we get it, and they have other brands in the portfolio. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do, albeit some years way into the distance. I hope that you and I are both in rude health in order to enjoy what comes out of Roadbank in the future, right? But yeah, there is that. I mean, Tamdu is very. As soon as you hear the words Tamdu, you see a dark whiskey, don't you? And I have to say that's similar to Glengoyne. You know, the sherry focus.
You see a dark whiskey and you see a beautiful bottle. Don't forget that, because I know a lot of people, many of my whiskey friends say, I don't care what bottle they pour it in. It's what's in the glass. Not to me. I love a nice bottle. I can do without the packaging. I don't need the tube. I don't need a wooden box. I just throw it away. But give me a nice looking bottle. I think Tamdu, that's a nice bottle.
The Art Deco shape, that's unique as well. I do like it. I do like the shape of the bottle. I do tend to be. I'm very, very happy with a quite plain, straightforward bottle. I mean, if you think about this Speyburn I'm holding here, if you think about Glencadam and things, you know, there's nothing pretty or attractive about those. But if there's any way that can save me a few pounds, then I don't need the bottle.
Okay.
Jimmy Legg is asking just a question at the Belize saying, where does Ingvar sit on Glen Scotia? And John Della Cuisine is saying, my top three of 2021 was Aaron 18, very good pick. Glen Scotia Victoriana, absolutely, and right in line with Jimmy's question. And Ben Romack Cask Strength was his number 3 out of a blind lineup of 13 whiskies. Terrific stuff. Very in line with what we enjoy in the channel, John, as well. Jimmy's asking what you think about Glen Scotia. This is one of these Renaissance distilleries, right?
Yeah. And if I'm happy to see what happened at Loch Lomond, I'm even happier to see what happened with Glen Scotia, because that used to be one of my favorite distilleries back in the 80s. And then everything went bad. And the owner at the time, for many years, Sandy Bullock, didn't pay that much attention to it, focused very much on blended whiskey and large volumes and young whiskies. But with the new owners, the same thing that happened with Loch Lomond has happened with Glen Scotia, of course. So one of my favorites last year was a Glen Scotia from the Campbelltown Festival, the
The
2021
Bordeaux.
festival bottling.
The
I don't know.
Bordeaux.
Yeah, I have it upstairs, but anyway, it was fantastic, and I love Loch Lomond nowadays. But
Yes.
as I said, I'm even happier to see Glen Scotia coming back to what it was
Well, that's
40 years
Ian
ago.
McAllister and the team down there
Ian
at Glen
McAllister,
Scotia.
fantastic job, absolutely.
And obviously the blender in charge at both those distilleries, Michael Henry, as well.
Yeah,
We can see it's becoming. It was very much a try before you buy for me for years, and that's not the case recently. You know, you're curious as to what the next thing is. I would suggest that Glen Scotia is a good alternative, an obvious alternative for Springbank. But I think Ingvar had already broached the topic of his love for Loch Lomond earlier in the stream tonight, and I think that natural presentation, that it's not always there in Loch Lomond, but they're leaning more and more of their core range is leaning towards that, moving towards 46% ABV, moving towards unchill filtered. They're getting there year by year, release by release. And I think they still bring fantastic value to Roland Whisky Radar is saying, please say cheers and thanks to Ingvar. From me, I'm looking forward to next week, as my wife indicated that I may get rather a 2020 message retracted, literally as I'm reading it out. Roland, what are you doing? It's the first time it's ever happened. So maybe you can paste, if you made a wee typo or something there, you can paste that back in. Roland, I picked that just as I started to read it. I'll look out for it, Roland, if it pops in again. Benny Fries is saying, Ingvar is getting it. I'm not seeking the next Springbank. There is only one Springbank, but interesting alternatives to Springbank, no matter the style. Perfect way to look at it, Benny. Falsgraf is saying, well, sometimes I keep the bottle as a vessel for homemade liqueurs. That's right, Falsgraf, especially if it's one that you like the Tam do for Ingvar. And Old Pulteney has always had great bottles. Slight change to the Old Pulteney bottles, Hoyt. I don't know if you've got the new branded Old Pulteney's out there yet. Whiskey Malt Content is saying New Glen Turret bottle is amazing. The squared off decanter style. Yes, I judged it based on the bottle. Again, whiskey taught me a lesson there. The New Glen Turrets are quite fantastic. And Eric Cunliffe is saying Loch Lomond makes sense to me as well. So many different styles and the unique control they have over their products. There's also a nice funk that shows as well. Let's ask you another wee question. There's quite a few, Ingvar, if you don't mind, that I'm going to keep to the end. That are very specific about you, the Malt Whisky Yearbook, and Ingvar Ronde in particular. But if Ben at Whisky with Molly, kind of on topic, talking about the shifting values here, he's saying, I think the new distilleries are an interesting proposition. Do established distilleries that already have a large following take note of what's happening here? Will new distilleries be able to influence the market in terms of price point and innovation? Dare I say the kick up the backside some established distilleries might need? Will the predicted price rises of larger established distilleries see a significant shift to people searching for better value whiskey? Or is that shift so small it'll barely be felt by the big producers? So it's kind of us moving into what's coming over the horizon to help this variation, this wonderful time to be in whiskey, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The next challengers, what's on the horizon? Why has Scotch not to rest on its? You talked about this history. We can always learn from history, right?
Yeah.
That fair pricing, reasonable, not cynical releases. Springbank's model in some respects, just being integrity and honesty. Surely that's the long-term game plan. Surely. And what if it's not? What challengers do we have there? What's exciting coming over the horizon?
I think first of all, if we talk about the new distilleries, if the established distilleries can learn something from them, to start there, I think they can, because all the new distilleries, most of them at least, have something, as we touched upon earlier this evening, trying new yeast, new strains of barley, roasted malts, new weird mash bills. I mean, that's something really interesting happening in Scotland. It's been happening in the rest of the world for decades now, but it's happening in Scotland as well, where they add rye into the mash bill and wheat and maize and whatever. But due to the regulations from the SWA, they have to call it grain whiskey, of course. And I'm not saying that the big producers aren't doing anything. I mean, they've been doing rye whiskey at Tininic now for at least 10 years. And not everybody knows that. I mean, and there are, I mean, for God's sake, there are whiskey distilleries from the big companies doing gin right now in Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, Tininic and likewise Inchtairney, they have, because of the mashing system there, they have the ability to handle that grain, right? And
yeah, it's easier for them because they have a mash filter, of course, in the same way that Inchtairney has. But so I'm sure that some of the smaller distilleries will influence the bigger distilleries. And what I've been worried about is, in this new market, how on earth will the small distilleries, these new 35 distilleries, how would they be able to sell their whiskies? I mean, we all know that space shelf is a critical factor. A physical store, they can't just say, okay, we have 30 new distilleries, we'll build another shelf. Now we have this space that we have. But I think what's happened now in these past 18 months due to the pandemic is that online sales have increased so much and developed. And I think the new distilleries can benefit from that, because people are getting
with the benefit of a search bar, search space, or the importance of shelf space, is much reduced, right?
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So, but I'm getting off the topic here. We're talking about where are the threats to Scotch whiskies, and I mean, you always have some threats from other types of spirit. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, we were talking about rum should be the next malt whiskey. It hasn't happened. I mean, I love rum, but I mean, the sales figures doesn't say anything that they should be a threat to Scotch malt. We were talking about gin. Okay, it's not that easy that if you're a whiskey drinker, you don't just swap to gin, or you drink them both. But gin is still around. Gin is still growing, but at a much smaller scale. I remember last year I was talking about one of the worst threats is people not drinking, the new generation.
Yes.
And I hate calling that a threat. I mean, if my daughter decides not to drink alcohol, well, that's probably a good thing. I don't know. That could be a threat. And also we have all the ready to drink low alcohol cans that are popping up everywhere. So, but if we look just within the whiskey segment, with all these distilleries being opened up in not least in America, Australia, Taiwan, China, all around Europe, yes, I think that could be a threat to Scotch whiskey. Absolutely. And it hasn't become that kind of a threat yet, because most of these distilleries are quite small, so their volumes are very low. But what we're seeing now in India, and we've been accustomed to Amrut, they started, then came Port John and Rampur. I added 3 or 4 new distilleries in India in the latest book. And these distilleries are big. They are huge. But the malt whiskey production is quite small. But if they decide, if Piccadilly Distillery, who's doing Camet, do you have Camet in the UK?
I've not seen it yet.
Now, brand new single malt, but small volumes. But Piccadilly, and for instance, it's Surinder Kumar, who left Amrut, who is the man behind Camet single malt. if Piccadilly decided to, okay, we should up our production on single malt, they could easily make 2, 3, 4, 5 million liters next year. So that could be a threat with another 10, 15, 20 Indian distilleries deciding, okay, we should do malt whiskey and not just our molasses-based
Yes, yes.
classic Indian whiskey. And we now see in China, I mean, Diageo, Pernod Ricard, they've opened up there.
Yep.
There are a couple of other big ones, really big ones, talking about 10, 15 million liters. So,
I think it's all of that is very interesting, and I wonder. It'd be nice to ask you if you think that all of these, whether it's a new distillery in Scotland, or whether it's a new distillery in Ireland or India or the United States or anywhere, Southern Hemisphere, it doesn't matter where. Scotland has a huge advantage right now that Scotland is really the only place you can go to buy a mature 18, 21-year-old product, right, at an affordable price, let's say. So there isn't a lot of choice out there, but it's not always going to be like that in the future. If we look ahead to 2022, though, if this year ahead, I think that it would be interesting to ask you, Ingvar, do you think that all of the new distilleries are a reaction to the demand? Or do you think that they are all building product that they're then going to be forced to have to try and create the demand for?
I think most of the new, the companies that are opening new whiskey distillers now, I think they're spot on. I think they are right in the calculation that whiskey is growing. All the figures are pointing to that. Whiskey, not just Scotch malt whiskey, but whiskey is growing. So I don't fear that. I mean, so far, of all these 35 distilleries that have opened since 2000, we haven't seen one of them close.
Yes.
I mean, and the first years are crucial. I mean, the first 3, 4 years, I mean, it's so difficult. You have to have the money.
In fact, conversely, we've found it difficult to buy the product.
Exactly. So these discussions have been going on now for 5, 6, 7 years. When we see the capacity of Scotch whiskey production increasing, who will drink all this? I don't see any problem, at least. I mean, if you would open a distillery in Scotland with a capacity of 15 million liters, and you're not one of the big ones, you're a new guy, okay, that could be tricky. That's a lot of whiskey to get onto the market. But all these that have opened now, they have a capacity between 50,000 or 1 million liters. I mean,
yeah,
that can easily be swallowed by the whiskey community in the world.
I loved the stat in your article. Well, it was actually, I think it was, it was Joel Harrison's article, Back to the Future, in the 2022 yearbook. He talked about this huge expansion, the stats and things, and he talked about the huge expansion in malt production. And of course, the capacity doesn't always mean that's what they're actually making, of course.
No.
In the case of Springbank, they could theoretically make 800, 900,000, a million litres maybe, but with Springbank are 300,000 to 400,000 actual in real terms. So actually the capacity isn't always what's being made. But if you imagine that if you added up all of the 35 new distilleries, you would probably struggle to get close to the capacity of just one of the expansions from like a Glenlivet, 10.5 million to 21 million in the space of just a few years.
Right, absolutely.
So we have to remember, and while there's a bit of a dichotomy, they both have their place. This mass market whiskey, this whiskey that's going to end up in blends, this malt that will end up in blends, it'll end up in a globally distributed price point branded whiskey, versus a Lindores Abbey, this or an Ardnamurchan that's going to continually have the opposite challenge of just trying to keep the thing on the shelf. It's the scale that's really the issue there.
Yeah.
And the scale is really in response, I think, to market demand. I mean, the reason for all these wee distilleries popping up now is because we're here, right? and we love flavor and variety. We love the experimentation. We love the new choice. It's going to be interesting to see. I think 2022, Ingvar, one of my predictions would be that I think stock will stick a wee bit longer in 2022 than it did in the last 2 years. I think we're competing. Hopefully, if we can get past this, global pandemic condition that we still find ourselves battling with, we're going to see things to distract people, alternative places for people to go to make speculative income, where whiskey is given a bit of a breather. And also, I am suspicious that a lot of the whiskey that's given us the availability problems over the last couple of years are not being opened and shared and enjoyed. They're being hoarded. And there's an inevitability that some amount of that is going to come back onto the market a little bit as well. And I think that could start to happen in 2022. I don't know. Daniel Williams is this was in my questions for you. I was going to ask you at the end, Ingvar. Are we the only people to get the 2022 misprint, or is the whole release the same? It's my feeling that this blooper is, you know about it, right? Yeah.
No, first time I've seen it. Yeah, that was the worst typo I ever made. And it's entirely my own fault. I can't blame the printing company. I can't blame anyone. I got a fair few messages on
I can imagine. I'm sorry.
yeah, and people asking me, well, I thought I bought the new copy, but I bought it for a friend, and my friend already has the old one, so can I get a new one? But you have to read through it, and it's all new. But yeah, that was bad.
So all of them say 2021 though. There isn't a collector's item in a blooper or anything.
No,
all the same.
No, I'm sorry, you can't sell the 2021 for £2,000 on eBay. They all have 2021 on the title page. Yeah.
Everybody, there you go, Daniel. Everybody has got the exact same bloopers. If we talk about the stats I just mentioned and about capacity there, just to kind of round this off before we start to spend a few minutes talking about Ingvar. Joe Harrison, I think it was his article where he also talked about the price increases, or maybe it was you. I think it might have been your writing. You talked about a couple of things that I found was interesting. You touched upon at the start of the broadcast tonight, learning from history, but you brought up this thing about YOLO, that you only live once acronym, right? And if you look at some of the things that have happened in the past, the mini boom of the 20s, despite the prohibition and things like that, everything Scotch realized, and that was on the back of the free living, let's say, the change in society and things after the First World War. We see the exact same post Second World War. We see that boom happening, then it falls out of fashion in the late 70s into the 80s, and then the steady, never-ending increase in interest in premium whiskies, single malts, all of these things that we're still, every year we see this kind of compounded growth that's still happening. You talked about that being a real dynamic, about that idea that, maybe this is a luxury product. It's a product that enhances the fact that we're mortal and alive. Is that a dynamic that follows whiskey? And maybe post-pandemic, are we going to start to see everybody continuing to throw money after whiskey, do you think? Do you think the pandemics had the same impact?
Yeah, but I think when we talk about that, we have to realize that we can't just talk about whiskey as one product. I mean, looking at price increases, and I know we touched upon that just before we started. I had a quick look going back to what are the price increases. I had a lot of figures from 2014 when I did a copy of one of my Swedish books, and I compared these prices to the prices today, and I realized, and I'm looking at my sheet now, I compared 20 single malts, and these are prices in Sweden. I compared 20 single malts. So this was 8 years ago. No age statement up to 15 years old. And they've increased by 11% on average in 8 years. And the inflation during that time is exactly 11%. But then when I look at another 20 single malts, 16 years old and up, the price increase was 55%.
Yeah.
In 8 years. Okay, so I had a look at some newer figures. from 2019 to 2022, and these are UK prices. I looked at 55 whiskies, no age statement up to 14 years old, and they were up by 2.9% on average, and the inflation was during that time 4%, so lower than inflation. If I looked at another 50 whiskies from 16-year-old up to 25-year-old, they were up by 9% in 3 years. So
Yeah.
when we say whiskey, I mean, at least for me, I started to look more and more towards whiskies that are 15 years old or younger, because it looks like, from my figures here, it looks like they follow the inflation. But the ones above 15, 16 years old, I mean, they're going like this.
And I think that's what we talked about, is that Scotch is really the only place to go to get that age of product, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're going to go to a different spirit on the continent or something.
Yeah.
Scotch whiskey is the only place. Bourbon doesn't mature for that long. None of the Asian whiskies matures for that long. Scotch they're the only people to have that maturity of product.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, if you look at Asian whiskies, to be quite honest, and that's debatable, of course, we can have a long discussion about that, and I'm happy to have it. But I mean, we all know that whiskies from India and from Taiwan, they don't have to mature for 25 years. They can't mature for 25. There will be nothing left because the Indian share is so high. And we can have a 10-year-old Amrut that tastes like 35 years old. And you can always discuss, okay, and that type of maturation that we have in a different climate, does it add the same style that we are expecting from a slow maturing 35-year-old whiskey in Scotland? No, probably not. But we get some very mature flavors from a much younger whiskey from Asia. And if you're talking about threats to Scotch whiskey, that is one threat. That even in Tasmania, I mean, you can have a whiskey 5 years old that could taste like a 15-year-old Scotch.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I mean, for me, wonderful experiences, wonderful whiskies to have in all of the categories that you're talking about. But there always seems to be this thing that makes it slightly different. Some European whiskies, very recently, have started to taste much, much closer to Scotch. I think that's got as much to do with the fact that we're starting to taste much more mature examples from these producers. So we're starting to see them take on this elemental depth and this density of flavor that only comes with maturation. And I think that in the past, what we've seen is what we're seeing with new distilleries in Scotland, where they've got young spirit and they're using, not heavy-handed, but they're certainly heavily reliant on cask influence to bring these things on and to make them enjoyable and flavoursome without being too youthful and kind of rough or jagged. And I think that's what we always see, this kind of differentiation. This is good whiskey, but it's not Scotch. And I still haven't found an alternative to Scotch yet. It's interesting what you talk about the prices, how the younger whiskies or the standard 10, 12, 15-year-old product is mirroring very bizarrely close to inflation. And the Swedish examples, I'm going to put it to you that we would find a similar thing in the UK. There have been some whiskies that jump jarringly high in price because they're perceived to be undersold, because they're there's implied limited availability or whatever it may be. But generally speaking, I can still buy a 21-year-old Glencadam for about £100. I can still buy a 24-year-old Anok for about 120. Wonderful whiskies that won't always be there. And I do agree with you fully. If we're looking for a more mature product, we might want to tie down the ones that we feel like we might not be able to do without now. But always remember that today's 15-year-old is only 5 or 6 years away from being tomorrow's 21-year-old. And the capacity, the maturing stock that's out there in the landscape is more than there's ever been. I think that my worry is that there's an availability, or there's people who are willing to spend the crazy money for the 18 and the 21-year-old plus today, but are they necessarily going to be there in 5 or 10 years' time when all these wonderful whiskies are going to be available at much better prices at 15, 16 years old? It's going to be interesting.
I can see where you're going, Roy. You're hoping for a new whiskey law.
Well, I'm hoping.
Well,
I did promise at the outset that we would try and keep a positive, pragmatic spin on things. But at the end of the day, we have to, if we're all going to go, these prices are crazy. What tends to drive that narrative is specific examples. Nobody is sitting down and analysing the whole available whiskey right across the board and saying, here is the price now and here's the price 3 or 4 years ago. What we've got is we've got our favourite whiskies getting taken away from us because they're being discontinued potentially, or they're being rebranded into something different, or because the price has been bumped up. And that's what makes people upset. So that's what tends to fuel the narrative on social media here in our environment as well. I'm part of the problem, definitely. But I think and what we tend to occasionally once a year we'll do a where's the value thing. We'll try and find out where the good value whiskies are. We'll try and find and dig out the ignored series. We'll do ignored whiskies and things. And I think it's while we're going to have a rant about these expensive whiskies or these price increases, we have to keep a balance and say, well, you know what? The value prospect in whiskey generally, even in Scotch single malt whiskey, is there's still a value proposition there. Look at these whiskies and tell me what you think of them. Graham Fraser is saying, does Ingvar think those new distilleries most likely to succeed are those that have employed experienced distillers? Well, that's interesting to me, because one of the biggest successes of a new distillery would be Ardnamurchan, and I don't think they employed a big ticket name, did they? They had
no. And the question is, what will happen with Loch Lee when they hired one of the most experienced distillers in Scotland? But anyway, I mean, before John even moved there, they released the whiskey. I haven't tried it yet. Have you, Roy? The one from Loch Lee?
Loch Lee, I haven't even seen available yet. It was postponed until January or February, wasn't it?
Okay, I have a picture of it in the book, but yeah, it was postponed. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a supply issue with packaging, I think, or bottling or something.
Okay. Yeah. No, but I think that to answer Graham here, and by the way, Graham, it was really nice to meet you in at the Highlander Inn a few months ago. But to answer your question, I mean, most of these new distilleries never hired, a few of them at least, hired a very experienced distiller. And so when I meet with these distillers, they always had a very well thought strategy for what kind of whiskey they would like to make. And whether it was Knocknean or Torabeg or whatever, but I think John is definitely the most famous distiller of these small distilleries that I know of.
We had Alistair MacDonald went down to Clydeside.
Yeah, of course. He came from Occupies. Yeah, of course.
Richard Patterson famously is involved in the Wolf Craig project, and there is some. And Ian McMillan is a fantastic consultant for so many projects all over the place.
Yeah, but he's working more as a consultant, so he stays for 5-6 months, and then he moves on to the next project. So yeah.
So he can help lay a foundation for younger hands or more inexperienced hands, and give them a kind of, I guess,
absolutely, and in the same way that Jim Swan did for so many distilleries around the world before he passed away. I mean, and his legacy is fantastic, and I don't think Kavalan would have been what they are today if they hadn't hired Jim Swan in the first place.
Well, that's the exact same for Ardnamurchan, for Kilchoman,
so many distilleries.
For so many distilleries out there, that legacy. McCallan Fine Rare Doc is saying, inaugural releases are always an easy sell. Expression number 5 is where the fun starts. Some wisdom in that, Doc, no doubt. Jimmy Legacy saying, when did Ingvar start drinking whiskey? I heard him mention the 80s. Yes, we got that story on Ingvar's original video, his appearance back in 2020, Jimmy. So you might want to go back and spend a wee bit of time, and he'll tell us. It was a train journey, wasn't it, Ingvar? So, or a visit to Scotland with your friends. Blair Stevenson saying it'll be interesting to see what happens with new distilleries opening and recent incoming price releases. Inaugurals sell themselves, but where do they price themselves after that? Absolutely. Careful, Aquavita, everyone just saying that sounds like a Menno asshat question. Okay, sorry, apologies. The asshat questions come later in the night. There will be a quiz, and there's inevitably going to be at least one of those, everyone. Strap in, my friend. Danny Hebbington is saying, when in the year is Ingvar's book released? Well, I think that's a good segue to start kicking off the questions for you, Ingvar. When is the next? We're very happy with the 2022, no pressure.
Good.
I'm going to add to that. When is the new 2023 coming out? And I'm nervous when you decide to throw the towel in. This is a necessity now. I've become very addicted to this thing, and I need to know that it's going to endure for a little while. So when's the 2023 one coming out first?
1st of October.
Every year, 1st of October.
Every year, 1st of October.
And the best place to buy it is Malt Whisky.
Yeah. I mean, this year has been absolute disaster in terms of distribution, because normally I would sell it from my website from 1st of October, and I start sending out 1st of October. And if you want to buy it from Amazon this year, for instance, Amazon, it has been a complete mess in the UK because of Brexit, because of no lorries, no petrol, no drivers, and also that my distributor had some problems. They had to move their warehouse during an entire month. So distribution has been a huge problem this year. I know Amazon in UK didn't get it until mid-November, but from my website, from 1st of October every year.
But if I understand well, and I picked this up from your 2020 appearance, the best place to buy it is directly from you, because you get the most cut, and you're also, and I don't know if I've caused you problems by suggesting that.
I know where you're getting at now. No. You didn't cause me any problems. And I try to pick up all these messages about signing the book. And if I sometimes miss it, I'm really, really sorry. But I really try to pick up all these personal messages. I'd be happy to sign the books for you. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good. I mean, we're a wee while off. Hopefully everybody's got their 2022 copy now. I did it. We're not trying to scare anyone here, but you actually suggested to me that this might be the first one that sells out in the first year of publication, right?
It looks like that, yeah.
Yeah. Now we've had the luxury of being able to go back onto the website and buy back editions. Which is fabulous. Yeah. But this one,
you still can do that, except for 2006, 2007, and oddly enough, 2020. That's gone from, at least from my website.
2020 is gone as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to buy back editions as well, you can do the exact same thing. For me, it suggests that the demand for this book, because presumably you didn't print any less for 2022, it's reflective of the growing interest in malt whiskey, surely.
Actually, I printed a little less already in 2021, or in 2020. That's the one we call 2021. Yes. Due to the pandemic, because I realized that one of my channels to sell the book is from the distillery visitor centers. And I realized, of course, early on that most of them would be closed during 2020. So I think I printed 1,000 copies less. But then I increased again for 2022. And so it's not growing every year, because if it should grow past, I print around 16,000 copies a year. But and I've been doing that for the past 5, 6, 7 years. If I should grow the book, I need to liaise with a huge printing company or publishing company, and I don't want to do that, because I still want to have the control of the book. It's just me. I'm doing it. I'm making all the calls. So I'm quite happy with selling these 16,000 copies a year.
Doc is saying that he did try to order from your website, but the shipping costs were high. Doc's in Germany.
Okay, yeah.
Graham Fraser is saying, has Ingvar any plans for a personal whiskey book projects in the pipeline? I asked you something similar. You're doing things in your own language that's translated into other languages that's not English, right?
I've been doing 7 or 8 books for the Swedish market, where it's all my writing, and I mean, Malt Whisky Yearbook has to be very objective. It's a yearbook. It should reflect what happened in the year. The Swedish books are more my personal reflections on whiskies and ideas about whiskey. And as you say, Roy, they've been translated into German and Dutch. Still hoping for a English publisher to show an interest, but it hasn't happened so far. I have a feeling that English publishers want to publish whiskey books by British authors, not by a Swedish author. Yeah, just a hunch. I don't know. Yeah, just have that feeling.
That's incredible, because I have a feeling that when it comes to grammar, and especially written English, Ingvar Ronde could probably teach me a thing or two. So that would be frustration if that's the case.
Roy, I have people helping me with English, so it's not just up to me.
Absolutely. Well, I think there's. Let's park that. There's more to be discussed about that in the future. I've got. I'll put a wee paperclip in that one. I've got a couple of other questions. One from Jerry Miller. One of the newer distilleries, what new stuff is heading our way, and which is Ingvar most excited about trying? So I guess you're keen about Lochlee. You've already mentioned that Lochlee that you've not tried yet. Anything else that you're keen? I mean, obviously we've got quite a lot happening.
I'm really keen on trying different bottlings from Torabeg, just because they're doing what I mentioned early on. They have several distillers doing their personal bottlings, and as far as I know, they haven't been released yet. But so it's right now. It's just
this is their own staff that they're rotating to do their own thing, right?
Yeah, yes. They call it the Journeyman's Project. Yeah, so I think it's quite fascinating what they're doing there.
Inevitably, that's going to become competitive.
yeah, absolutely.
That'll be fun. Yep.
Otherwise, I mean, I really enjoy what I've had so far from Ardnamurchan. I consider Ardnamurchan classic old style whiskey. To me, it reminds me of a little bit of what I can find in a Springbank, to be honest.
Wow. I think Ardnamurchan is going to fascinate me when they get to the point that they're able to release something that becomes much more of a kind of core product.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've not tasted anything from Ardnamurchan that wasn't interesting, and some of them have really kind of literally knocked me on my backside. I've really loved them. But what we're seeing here is we're seeing kind of batch releases, and they're quite happy to embrace them, and for them to be a bit different each time. Just make the best whiskey they can with what they have available that's ready to go. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for one of their blending sessions. I think that would be fascinating. But I think what's going to happen is when we see a depth of maturity there, that will be interesting, and I'll remember that comment. That is curious that you've said maybe that we could end up. That Western Highland thing is there. The whole reason for the vPub to be Ardnamurchan was to talk about how location could potentially be incidentally affecting what they're making there. I love the saltiness, the salinity, the minerality.
It seems to me that the purpose is to make a whiskey that is very personal. It's a bit demanding. I mean, it really acquires something from you as a drinker. You can just enjoy it, or you can really sit and think about it, and it will add so much more. So I'm a huge fan of Ardnamurchan.
Am I? Or you? Or you are?
I am a huge fan of Ardnamurchan.
Yeah, I think it's been very well received right across the board. Absolutely. And it's going to be interesting to see. And it's when you talk about that kind of density of flavor, where these whiskies that give you the ability just to drink if you want to drink, but some of them are so compelling that they really distract you as you sip them, right? Because they're kind of drawing you in. Another one here, a question here, Ingvar, from Matt. My question to Ingvar would be, this is Matt Bishop, would be around the subject of the possibility of an online or app version of the yearbook. It's the 21st century, and I'm sure less paper being used could help climate change. Personally, although I love my collection of whiskey books, if I need a quick whiskey fact, I'll often just Google it on my phone. Now, I know the answer to this because we've discussed this at length, but I thought I'd pose that question to you.
Yeah. I don't see that coming. I know I have people in the family who says, much younger people, and say, Ingvar, for God's sake, I mean, you have to realize that you can still print your book, but books printed on paper are becoming an anomaly. I'm not really. I don't see that coming. No. Short answer, no, not in the near future.
I could have answered on your behalf.
Thank you.
I knew that, but I have to say, just to reinforce it, I mean, I think it's okay to be modern and to be efficient and to have these great ideas and things. I'll go back to Matt and I'll say that Matt, he's absolutely right. If he wants to know, he's always got his phone on him, regardless of where he is. He'll have a data connection. He can pick it out and he can find out what's the capacity at Genenic or whatever it may be. Okay, fantastic. But in a whiskey context, if I'm sitting here watching whiskey content, if I'm on the couch, if I'm up, I've got a copy of this next to my bed. I've admitted that before. This isn't a new thing. You know, it's always on hand. And I love the tactile, tangible nature of this book. I love that you can roll it up and fit it in a jacket pocket or a backpack or whatever. I love that it's just here. It's just here. Of course, it's print, so there's theoretically it goes out of date as soon as it's printed. But what you're actually doing is building. We talked about that encyclopedic snapshot there, year by year. I can pick out my 2008 Whiskey Yearbook, and it's fascinating to compare.
And as you say, Roy, you can fold it up, you can abuse it because you know there's a new one coming next year. I mean, it should be worn out when the next one comes.
Exactly. I want to envisage an app, Ingvar, a smartphone app that I could quickly go back to 2008 and remember what the app told me back then. That doesn't exist in a digital realm. That's a very analog thing. That's a very printed thing. And I think that the Malt Whisky Yearbook for me kind of transcends that blue light screen experience and becomes
and that very much reflects the person I am. So no, sorry, no app. No digital version, no.
I remember having to hold your hand a wee bit through the first appearance on the vPub, and you borrowing a laptop with a webcam from your wife because yours didn't even have it. Absolutely. Tim Hoekstra is asking, ask him if he noticed. Okay, this is a bad. Okay, sorry. He's saying that he enjoys the blooper. I'm not going to ask the question because it's already been covered. So there you go, Tim. It's been covered. Ingvar knows about it, and he does. Receive a message or two about it.
Actually, it took me just 10 seconds to I thought about it when I noticed it. I said, shit. And after 10 seconds, so what?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
If it had been on the cover, that would have been terrible. But
on the inside. And you can argue that, you know what? It was published in 2021. You know, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
As things were in 2021. Blair Conrad, who incidentally is Jimmy Legg, he's saying, I love whiskey, but not enough to complete an annual publication about it. I can't imagine how much Ingvar loves whiskey. We talked about the Passion Project when you joined us in 2020, Ingvar. Can you ask if he still feels the same way about whiskey and its producers after all of the years of work he's put into documenting it? I thought that was a very good question.
I still have the same passion, but it seems to me over the years, it has changed a bit because I've become less interested. This may sound odd, but I've become less interested in that particular whiskey I have in the glass. then I have become more interested in the people making the whiskey and the history behind the whiskey. I still drink whiskey every now and then, and I love a great dram. But let me tell you about my greatest memory from 2021. That was when I came back to Scotland for the first time. Last time I was there was in late 2019, and then I couldn't travel for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
Then I managed to come back to Speyside for a week, first week of November last year. And a friend of mine, Paul McLean, picked me up at the airport in Edinburgh, and we head north. And our first distillery visit was at Balmenach. And I stepped out of the car. I hadn't been in Scotland for 2 years. I stepped out of the car. I got the wonderful smell of mashing in. We went into the tun room. I could sense the fermentation. We got into the still room. I could feel the warmth. I could hear the sounds. And I almost had tears in my eyes. Then I realized after just an hour or so, what I really had missed was meeting with all these people making the whiskey. And I went to 20 distilleries in 7 days during that week. And every time I realized what I had been missing was, again, the people. And chatting with them, sharing a dram with them. And so that has become so much more important to me over the years than finding that rare whiskey or buying that rare bottle. Roy, you and I, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. FOMO, fear of missing out. It's so widespread in the whiskey community, at least here in Sweden. People are absolutely anxious about missing that particular bottling, that particular cask strength Highland Park or local barley Springbank, and it's sold out in just a few seconds here in Sweden, and they are so annoyed about that. And I stopped being annoyed about that probably 10, 15 years ago. If I miss that, there will be another whiskey, or I will drink some of my favorite whiskies, as long as I can do it together with friends who enjoy whiskey, and I can talk about whiskey with them, or hopefully coming back to Scotland again, hopefully in March. But that moment in November when I stepped out at Balmenach and I realized it wasn't really the whiskey I'd been missing. It was people.
It was the connectedness. Absolutely. We get it. And you're preaching to the converted here, because I think what a lot of people have discovered in the community is that they step in for whiskey, but they very, very quickly find something that's much, much more valuable, and that's that way to connect with people.
I realize that,
regardless of where you are in the world. And the exact same happened to me. The same thing happened to me when I met with a friend. First time that I was back in a distillery, it was just up at Glen Scotia, Frank, and the smells is the thing that got me, and I wasn't prepared for it. But you stood in the courtyard and you got the smell that it was the same smell. It was the barley, it was the malt as it was mashed in, and you were, oh my goodness. And it was like a flutter of happiness. And
it was
this is just amazing. And the fact that you were there speaking to people, seeing people's reactions as you speak, and wonderful, absolutely wonderful stuff. So, you know, it doesn't sound odd to any of us. We come here for the whiskey and we find we still enjoy the whiskey. We absolutely love it. And some of us, myself included, will find expressions released over the course of a year that we will obsess about, that we will really want to have because we've built an emotional connection with it potentially. But generally, it's much, much more about the people and the friendships that you make. Last question then is from Mark Lambert. And he's saying, I do appreciate hearing a bit more about the research for the publication process, because it can be so challenging to get info from distilleries themselves. This is maybe your special relationship that you have in order to keep the thing up to date. Pardon my ignorance, but is each annual issue intended to be a comprehensive and historical, or a cumulative, or is it more a snapshot for that particular year? So are you building an encyclopedia, or is it just a snapshot in time?
It's a good question, because the answer is it depends. If we look at the Scottish distilleries, which is the main chapter of the book, it depends on what happened at that particular distillery during the year. And sometimes nothing happens. I mean, so, some of the 29 Diageo distilleries, nothing happens. I mean, Strathmill, nothing happens. Inchgower, nothing happens. So in order to have something new to say there, I have to dig deeper, or I have to dig elsewhere to have a story that's new compared to last year, because I never repeat the same text. So and sometimes that's quite a challenge. Other distilleries, easy. I mean, otherwise, either there are lots of new bottlings, or there's a change in ownership, or they have 7 new stills, or whatever. But sometimes you really have to challenge yourself to find a new angle, because you always have to have something
Well,
new.
I can imagine that might become more challenging with some of the newer distilleries 5 or 10 years down the line. But when you're talking about a Strathmill, a Glen Scotia, a Mannockmore, all of the, you know, they've been around for so long. There's always going to be some kind of story that you can a different angle, a different perspective. Yeah,
absolutely. It's easier with those distilleries that have been existing for 200 years or something.
Well, if we pick up the Malt Whisky Yearbook in 2020, whatever it may be, and we open up an entry and it says, "Nothing has happened," we'll forgive you. It's okay. Please refer to the previous year.
I can't do that. I would hate to do that.
Listen, is there anything, Ingvar, before we move into the quiz? And by the way, you're very, very welcome to stay for the quiz. You might find a couple of the questions a wee bit easier to answer for you, Ingvar Ronde. But before we move into the quiz, is there anything that we can do as the Barfly community, the wider whiskey community, the digital community, the YouTube, WhiskeyTube, is there anything we can do to help you? Is there any challenges that you face? I think we asked this in the past. But is there anything that could crowdsource that wouldn't become a burden, that would become a benefit to you?
Well, the thing is, I mean, I know this is a widespread community we have people from the entire world here. The one problem I sometimes have is to because I realize, I have to be honest, I realize that I do not cover every malt whiskey distillery in the world in every edition of the Malt Whisky Yearbook. I'm the first to admit that. There will always be some that fall under my radar, and especially in countries outside of Scotland. So if there are some viewers here who, some barflies here who know about distilleries that they haven't found in my book, please do drop me an email so that I can enter them in the next book. I would really appreciate that.
What you need is a Graham Fraser, because he's the perfect guy in Scotland for you. Honestly, I don't think there's much that Graham doesn't know anything about. You need somebody in England, somebody in Ireland, somebody in various places in the US, somebody in Canada, in order to consolidate that kind of thing.
I need a Graham in all corners of the world.
You just need a bunch of Grahams. That's exactly what you need. That's exactly what you need. Mark Slinger is talking about getting that very smell in his garden from Glenburgie Distillery. Mark, I can imagine that's a nice place to be when it's happening. Jason McDonald is saying this is exactly so many great whiskies that there is no good reason to go all stupid with fear of missing out. Absolutely. No. And Graham Fraser is saying he's here. Ingvar's a man after my own heart. The experience of the distillery and its people is as important as the bottle. Roland Whiskey Radar is saying a good quality sherry cask in particular are getting scarce. And what do you think? Well, actually, the supply chain is, as long as you're not picky about your sherry cask, as long as you're okay with it being made a specification to bring exactly what they're trying to, I don't think there is a scarcity, Roland, but I see you're coming. What does Ingvar think of the idea that retailers often bundle discounts for sherried whiskey and actual sherry? Well, I haven't seen that, but that is interesting. Do you enjoy a glass of sherry yourself, Ingvar?
I do. I don't drink it that often, but that's a good question. Why? I've been to a couple of tastings where they have cherry whiskies and have the appropriate cherries. I think I've done it a couple of times in London at the whiskey show, and that's quite fun.
So really Roland's got a good idea for all the specialist retailers out there. shrink wrap a sherry with a whiskey that it matches, and that's
Brilliant
a
idea.
brilliant idea. Ben is saying, as Ingvar needs anyone to visit distilleries in Scotland on his behalf, I'm happy to do some research.
Oh, thanks.
Eric Cunliffe is saying, Graham Fraser is a perfect chap for the job. He's the man, absolutely. And Falscraft is saying, I'm sure Ingvar knows about all the distilleries in the Leningertal here in Germany, close to where I live. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Falscraft, but aye, there you go. If he doesn't, if you think there's any under the radar, if you don't spot it in the Malt Whisky Yearbook, you can send them a wee quick message and say, are you aware, or whatever.
Please do.
Graham Fraser is saying you're too kind, and he's giving us a wee wink and a thumbs up. Are you able to stay for the quiz, my friend? Do you think?
Absolutely.
You're an hour ahead, as long as I'm not keeping you.
No problem.
Listen, we've managed to keep around and above 300 for the entire conversation, which is amazing. It's testament to these beautiful whiskey folk, honestly. But I think it's also folk keen to hear what Ingvar has to say outside of his annual yearbook as well. So thanks very much. If you're able to stay for the quiz, that would be amazing. Everybody, this is the quiz at the end. If you're pulling a parachute and jumping out, that's absolutely fine. But those of you who feel like you're not tired right now or whatever it may be, I encourage you to stay, because there's always something to learn, even from the infamous ass hat questions, funnily enough, named after our own named by our very own Jimmy Legg. It's always multiple choice. It's just meant to be a bit of fun. You're only playing against yourself. And you're only keeping your own score. So stay for a wee bit of fun if you like, just to close things out. We don't have a space side tonight, so I'll skip ahead and I'll pull this in. Now, we might see a couple of on-theme questions tonight, but you might see some kind of random things as well. I have to say, and one of the things I forgot to close out last year with the quiz, if you were to go back, much like we do with the Malt Whisky Yearbook, go back to a previous edition of the vPub, I think most of the people in here tonight would be able to score very, very highly. I get a feeling that the questions in the quiz at the end are kind of growing with the knowledge base of the community. I wonder if we were to take Roy from 3 or 4 years ago and ask him to answer the quiz I'm going to present to you tonight, I predict a dismal, dismal score. I think we're all learning together, and I'm very, very grateful for it. Ross Fudd is saying, Aquavite, are we going to get an annual Ingvar vPub? Ross, if Ingvar was willing to join me annually for whatever topic, even if it ends up being the look to the year ahead, that would be a privilege. I'll leave that to my friend in Sweden, whether he would like to consider joining again. You're always welcome, Ingvar.
Thanks.
We can't find Rare saying the upcoming Nuremberg Whisky Show will feature some sherry producers. So looking forward to that. So there's actually a whisky show with the sherry producers on site. Yet another way to leverage that kind of symbiosis that exists there. Ingvar, good luck, my friend. Everybody, good luck with the quiz. We'll roll into question number 1. The first Malt Whisky Yearbook was released in 2005. How many editions have been published? There is a banana skin here. Is it A, 16, B, 17, or C, 18? 2005. Does it seem like that, Ingvar? Has it become a ball and chain, or does it seem very fast?
No, it seems like it was just 5-6 years ago.
It's incredible, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
2005 was the first one that came out. Sorry, 2005 was the first year published. I'm looking into there is a wee bit of a lag tonight. I've noticed that. I don't know if it's my side. No, the answers are absolutely coming in. So people are trying to apply maths here. They're wondering why there's a banana skin in there, of course. It should cancel out. Ingvar, how many Malt Whisky Yearbooks have we had?
17.
Oh, let's see if I agree. Absolutely. I took it straight from the 2022. You'd actually mentioned it there. Remember, the first one came out in 2005, but it was obviously the 2006 edition. So potential banana skin there. But it's offset by the fact that the 2022 edition that you might have in your hands right now was published in 2021. So we're at 17 editions in. Question 2. In December, Fettercairn released batch number 2 of its 16-year-old, and it's notable because A, it was non-chill filtered in natural colour. B, because it's only available in 1 litre bottles. Or C, it's 40% but higher in price than edition number 1. What is notable about Fettercairn's batch number 2 16-year-old release, which came out in December? It's quite uncanny that we discussed this tonight. That was not intended at all. Absolutely. Everybody in the lounge has got the right answer here. Do you remember, Ingvar, we talked about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's non-chill filtered in natural colour, which is a big shift from the very, very dark original batch 1. If it is Greg Glass's influence, I celebrate it. I'm already hovering over the buy button to try the new 16-year-old. Based on my experience with that warehouse number 2, I really want to get my hands on that 16-year-old. I hope that it's as good as I imagine. Question 3. Of the 35 new distilleries listed in the 2022 Malt Whisky Yearbook, how many have already released their own whisky? Is it A, 8 of 35? Is it B, about half of the 35? Or is it C, 30 of the 35? There are 35 new distilleries. News in inverted commas there because Ingvar's got his own personal way to organise the Malt Whisky Yearbook. And the new distilleries at the back, I think Ingvar explained what makes it the difference, what makes a full page versus a half page new distillery. What's the difference between the two?
Sorry, okay. The difference is, I mean, all the distilleries that were established after Kilchoman receive a half page, because if every new distillery should have a full page, the book would grow into 400 pages soon enough. So, yeah.
Fantastic. So
Kilchoman was the last one to receive
They were the last one to get a full page.
Yeah. And Anthony Wills is very happy about that. Just
can you tell me what would you answer here? Because I'm not sure you know this one. I don't think you would know this.
No, it's a tricky one. I mean, about half. That seems a little, but I would probably go for a B.
Spot on. Well done. Absolutely. About half. 16 or thereabouts of the 35 listed distilleries. Remember things like Port Ellen, Rosebank, they're not included there yet, of course. They're not even in production yet. Various other producers are not listed. That's going to grow somewhat. But about half so far have released it. Yeah, the distilleries. Well done, everyone. Question 4. What happened for the first time in the 2022 Malt Whisky Yearbook? What was a first? Do you know what this is going to be? A, Glenlivet sold the most malt. B, Glenfiddich sold the most malt. Or C, it was a draw at 14.5 million bottles each. Now, this is a kind of war. There's always there's number 1 and number 2 here. And so for the first time in the 2022 Malt Whisky Yearbook, either Glenlivet took the top spot, A, Glenfiddich took the top spot, B, or C, it was a draw, 14.5 million bottles each. Ingvar, put the barflies out of their misery.
C.
How did that come about? They both sold, or they both reported 14.5 million bottles?
Yeah, well, thing is, it's always difficult to get exact figures from the distilleries. Either you get it from the distilleries or you get it from the IWSR or some other statistics company. But this year was the first that it was a draw, yeah.
Fantastic. Called a draw. Question 5. Here, believe it or not, we're not looking at an ice cream cone on its side. This is quite a striking and bold new distillery design. Now, don't get excited if you're looking at this and thinking, oh, I know what that distillery is. The question that I'm going to ask based on this picture is actually a bit of an asshat question. This has been designed in order to give a beautiful aspect over the river A, Forth, B, Clyde, or C, Ness. So there's going to be like some kind of platform bolted onto the side of this. I've got a little image that I'll show you after we've answered here. So that you get wonderful views of the vista across the estuary of the River Forth, the River Clyde, or the River Ness. Mike Molasses is asking if Graham Fraser took this photo. Many of the photos that I use in the vPub quiz are Graham Fraser's pictures, but this is an artist's impression. Unfortunately, this distillery does not yet exist, but I'll tell you that it is funded. And this is they have been granted planning permission, but this is a modification to the plans. So this is a slightly different take. Do you know which distillery we're looking at here, Ingvar? This is brand new.
Is it what's called Ardgowan?
Ardgowan, absolutely.
Ardgowan, yeah.
Absolutely. So we're now looking across the River Clyde. So this is just going to be west of Glasgow, down towards Greenock. And while what we're looking at here, we're actually looking, I believe, from the north to the south. So the distillery is kind of moving in this shape from west to east. But if you look at the next picture here, they've got this kind of platform that sticks out here that's suspended, and you're going to be able to walk out. So they're making a real visitor attraction of this. There's lots of other reasons for these design cues as well, but it's quite striking, and in no way, other than the shape of the stills inside the building, there's nothing traditional about this at all, right? So there you go. If you answered B, River Clyde. Question 6, bit of a banana skin potentially. Which of these distilleries in 2022 have an entire range of core range malts with age statements, 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, and no added color? All the ABCDs are met. A for age statement, B for bottling strength, C for chill filtration, and D for dye. The entire range now meets this. Is it A, Royal Brackla, B, Speyburn, C, Glencadam? There was a bit of a discussion that could potentially help you here tonight. It may help you avoid the banana skin. Daniel Williams thinks that distillery is ugly. I quite like it, Daniel. You have to understand the location that it's going to be in. I think it would be a really quite cool tourist draw down there on the north side of the Clyde estuary. Precarious Dave is in saying Ardgowan must be the south of the River Roy, must be looking north. Oh, I wonder if the opposite way around, Dave. Ardgowan, I guess. I suppose it must be south if it's on the Greenock side. You're right. So I guess that those windows could be facing east then, and the viewing platform facing north. I'm glad you're here, Dave. Thanks for helping me out. Do you know this one, Ingvar? Would you be guessing?
I would go for A.
And you would be absolutely spot on. So you're at 6 out of 6 this evening. The banana skin there was Glencadam. I've been talking about the natural presentation of Glencadam for a long time now, but they have the origin 1825, which is an honest statement, a price point whiskey at 40%, I think. Speyburn also have their Brad Norach, which is 40% as well, I think. But Royal Brackla, I've got a wee picture here of their new range. Some things do get better. I always felt that the Royal Bracklas of the past were always diluted and barely representative of what that distillery could produce. But now we have an entire range that is meeting all the natural presentation keystones that we look for. And I have to say, that's not a cheap 12-year-old, but it's fantastic. Really wonderful, really different direction for Brackla. The 18-year-old is quite salty on price. The 21-year-old is over £200. Both used a wee bit of Palo Cortado, both sherry bourbon mixes, I think. But the 12-year-old is quite an interesting prospect. It drinks way better than you would imagine a standard 12 as well. Question 7. Which of these Bens do not feature a Ben Romack style red chimney stack? This is one for the Graham Frasers out there. We're looking for one of these distilleries that does not have a red chimney stack. Benromach clearly has one, but is it A, Ben Nevis, B, Benriach, or C, Benrinnes? There's quite a few red chimney stacks out there. Glen Scotia has one, doesn't it? I'm trying to think who else has one. Oban famously has a red chimney stack. I think Lagavulin is maybe the only one on Isla. Red chimneys seem to be a thing for some distilleries, but I'm asking which of these Bens is the only Ben not to have a red chimney? Obviously, I'm looking at Graham Fraser here. I wonder if he's already answered. He's answered early. I wonder if he's going to lead the crowd, if everybody's going to answer A for Graham, for Ben Nevis. What do you think, Ingvar?
Well, I mean, Benrinnes red chimney, it's so visible from the road. So, but I'm struggling here, and I seem to believe that Ben Nevis does have a red chimney. So I'm going for B here, Benriach.
Well done. Well done. Benriach is a white chimney. I don't know if it's always been white. I'm talking about contemporary times. But absolutely, Ben Nevis does have a red chimney. It's one of the few red chimney distilleries. Benrinnes has that iconic tall, see it from miles away. You're absolutely right, on the slopes of Benrinnes itself. You can see that red chimney stack, one of the most obvious ones. I think Balmeric also has, Balblair has a red chimney. There's lots of so-called red chimney distilleries out there. Benriach is absolutely right. B is the right one there. Fantastic. 8 is potentially another wee banana skin. Which of these current Diageo malts has been a flora and fauna bottling? Which of these current Diageo malts has been a flora and fauna bottling? A, Glendullan, B, Cardew, C, Pittiveich. Oh, Rob is having a struggle tonight on 3 out of 7. Chris Pullock on 5. Already got a pass mark. Ryan Sutherland killing it on 7 out of 7. Matching Ingvar. Don McCausland, good to see you in, Don. Wonderful to welcome you into the vPub, my friend, on 4 out of 7. Good shape to get a pass mark tonight. Lawrence Bemer, that looks like a new name, Lawrence. Wonderful to welcome you in. George McLeod, that looks like another new name. This is fantastic. Gino and hint a pass mark already. What do you think? I'm asking you to think back to your flora and fauna days.
And would you say which of these current Diageo malts? You should really emphasize current here, right?
You're helping them. You're helping the bar blind.
Sorry, I'm thinking out loud.
No, that's good. It's good that you're helping them. So we're now down to a 50-50. That's the banana skin. Pittiveich was definitely a flora and fauna. But of course, Pittiveich is long gone. Pittiveich was an add-on to the Dufton distillery up there in Speyside. Which would you guess, Ingvar?
For me, it's A, Glendullan.
Not even a guess. Conviction there. Absolutely spot on. Cardew's never been a flora and fauna. Banana skin there was Pittiveich. It's not a current Diageo distillery. Not a current Diageo malt. There's still stocks out there. And you can still pick up the flora and fauna fairly inexpensively, although it was probably the least celebrated. Question 9. Which of these is a genuine Irish whiskey brand? I kid you not. One of these is legitimate. A, bloody pot still Irish whiskey. B, fecking Irish whiskey. Or C, gobshite blended Irish. Which of those is a genuine Irish whiskey brand? Do you recognise any? You can just say yes or no at this point, Ingvar.
Yeah, I have an answer.
you recognise one? Hell's Wind is struggling tonight. Oh my goodness, that's really off form. I hope 2022 isn't going to set the tone for your year, Helen, on 3 out of 8 tonight. You've still got a chance of a pass mark though. Seb K is saying B for a laugh. P-Head thinks B as well, as does Ross Fudd and Mike Molasses, Brian Sutherland and Lassie Otsman. Good to see you in, Lassie. What do you think it is? What is the genuine Irish whiskey brand? Ingvar?
Well, it sounds like it could be anyone, but I do know it's fucking Irish whiskey. B.
Yes. Absolutely feckin' Irish whiskey. It's not gobshite Irish whiskey. It's not bloody pot still. And here's a wee picture of the range as well. This is from Ecklinville in Northern Ireland, I think. So Dunville's is obviously the whiskey brand from there. Brought back to life again, but obviously there's some sourced whiskey in this blended bottle here. And I think that, you know, the reason I've included this tonight is that if we're going to bring interest back into blends, we're going to need to get creative. And I think that this is just as legitimate as any ploy. I would love the whiskey to be decent as well inside, but you can see the positioning of this here as well. And, you know, blends could be way better than they are handled right now. I'm not suggesting this is the way forward, but blends are probably the most neglected sector in whiskey if you come at them from the perspective of an enthusiast. Think of the blends that have been lost. Famously, there's a white horse tale in the Malt Whisky Yearbook of 2022, how it's grown 25% despite blends actually in contraction. And I think that's interesting. Maybe it's because it doesn't rely on duty-free sales and things, but I think it's because it's in the zeitgeist. White horse it's on the people thinking about Craigellachie and Lagavulin and, you know, Restless Peter Mackie. We know about the white horse legacy now, and there's an interest in white horse that maybe that could have something to do with it too. We need a different way to look at blends. We need to bring back Bailey Nickel Jarvie, and we need to make it bloody good and drinkable. Think about the Glasshouse that was released, famously made at Loch Lomond last year. A wonderful whiskey, 25, 30 pounds, and did superbly well in all the blends that I included it in last year. There is a way to treat blends, and I think that there's a trick being missed here and there. Anyway, the ass hat at the end. Ingvar, you are kicking it out the park. You're on 9 out of 9. This is easy street for you. The ass hat at the end is always, or in recent times, it's become always something to trip people up potentially. And it was famously named the ass hat question because Jimmy Legg was sick of them being about capacity. But I think capacity and scale and comparing scale, one of the most fascinating things to do to keep things in context, right? So this is a capacity question just for you, Jimmy Legg. Hellswood is saying, be gentle with ass hat. In 2013, the entire Scotch malt whisky capacity was 319 million litres per annum. Where was it in 2020? What happened in those 7 years? This is from the Malt Whisky Yearbook. A, it broke 350 million litres. B, it broke 400 million litres. Or C, it broke 450 million litres. Let's see if we can trip Ingvar up in his own stats. Can we?
My God, that was a tricky one. I should get this. I'm going for B.
You're going for B. Hellswood is saying, oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh dear, I'm going to have started Helen and Andy off on a difficult 2022. Lawrence is suggesting C for 50, as is Bruno Martins and the Lassie Hot Yachtsman. C for bigness, says Andrew Pears. C for a pass, says Jimmy Legg. Ross Fudd is C, got to be C. Well, Ingvar Ronde is suggesting that it broke 400 million litres. And I have to remind you all, everybody that's going for the C, for the bigness, it is the ass hat question at the end. But it does mean that Ingvar scores a solid 10 out of 10.
I'm so relieved.
Absolutely terrific. There you go. Wonderful stuff. That way you made it look easy. But of course, there was a slight advantage in it. Pretty much all of the data, with very few exceptions.
But this last question, that was important to me to get that one.
Absolutely. The stats, 405 million litres in 2020, showing an increase in capacity, not actual whiskey produced, we need to be clear, in capacity of 405 million litres. Ryan Sutherland is celebrating a 10 out of 10. You can take the throne alongside Ingvar. Well done, Ryan. Fantastic stuff. Did I miss anybody else on a 10 out of 10? I just don't want to miss that one because it was a good one. Daniel Williams is saying feck, and he's using the Irish whiskey brand. Steve Atkiss is saying, whoa, Whiskey Radar on 7, Pete Ed 7, Mark on 7. Ingvar for the win, says Eric Cunliffe, absolutely. Hoyt on 5 out of 10, Black Fair on 5 out of 10. Relieved that he's scraping a pass mark. Sid Martin, well done, 7. Ronald 6. I'm looking for the 10s, guys. Is there any other 10s as I scroll down? Oh my goodness, Ryan and Ingvar could be the only two that managed a 10 out of 10 tonight. I have to say, I went through that quiz again before we went live tonight, Ingvar, and I felt that it was quite crunchy. I'm quite impressed that you managed a 10 out of 10, and well done to Ryan Sutherland as well. Listen, my friend, I think what we can do to summarize everything that we've talked about, the first thing I want to do is thank you for all your efforts and everything that you've done for us, everything that you do for that Malt Whisky Yearbook. As Jimmy Legg and so many have pointed out tonight, clearly it's a labour of love, and we love to celebrate that. But thanks for stepping forward and sharing your opinions and your different take and your different perspective on things in whiskey generally. But I think more than anything, thanks for the pragmatism. Thanks for helping to keep this a wee bit positive and kind of reinforcing that idea that, okay, some things might slip out of reach because of availability, because of premiumization, because of price, whatever the reason is. But there's always going to be lots more wonderful whiskey.
I think that's really important to realize that, and especially whiskey should be fun. It should be a social thing. It should be enjoyed with friends, like we are doing tonight. And I really can't say too many times what you're doing, Roy, with assembling these great bunch of people here at the Barflies. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. And especially in these last 2 years that we've had, when we've been really handicapped with meeting people in real life. I mean, it's amazing. And now during the quiz, when we were talking earlier, I couldn't really read all the comments here, but during the quiz, I've read the comments. I mean, marvelous bunch of people here, and we together, we are so passionate about the thing we love. And I still remember talking about the first thing I mentioned with Jimmy Legg when he said on the 30th of December, he so enjoys being in this crowd because it's so welcoming. It's so, I mean, passionate. It's all about the thing we love, and it's so obvious. I so enjoy being here, really.
Well, in that case, I may consider bullying you into joining me in January every year.
I'm in. Count on that.
It would be fantastic, Ingvar, and I think it's good. I love the perspective. I love the idea that you're coming at it from whiskey passion first and foremost.
Absolutely.
You don't know what you do. For everybody that buys this book and relies on it year after year, looks forward to it, looks forward to the pieces from the contributors in there, the data, the stats, everything. It remains the most used, and it's not even one book. Like I've said before, I buy multiple copies of this. I gift it. I keep it around the house. I have them in backpacks and things. It is an absolute staple. I have talked to you in the past about how I've built a vPub quiz at the end based on the majority of the questions will find a route in that wee publication. I love it. So Hoyt Hempel has said, looking forward to seeing the 2022 book. It's going to say 2023 on it though, Hoyt. You won't make a typo this year.
Never again.
That'll be the first thing that he checks.
I've learned my lesson.
Absolutely. Graham is saying, always good to hear from Ingvar. I learn so much. Thank you so much, Graham. And Ross is saying, sounds great, Roy. Make it so. So I think that's another call from the States that you should be coming back here in January every year. And Jimmy Legg is saying, if you ask questions out of my book, I'd get 10 out of 10 too. Rather, Ryan Sutherland is humility coming out of Ryan there, saying it was pure luck. Ryan, you always score very strongly, my friend. I think it's a wee bit more than luck. Chris Pollack is also suggesting a slight advantage, but the pressure is more because Ingvar had an advantage. There's even more pressure on him to get it right. And Benny is saying Ingvar is cheating. He has memorized all the data in his own book. Maximum respect from here. Thank you so much, Benny, over in the Netherlands, my friend. Terrific stuff. Lots of thanks and gratefulness coming in. Let's raise a wee glass. Ingvar, if you can stay behind the scenes, my friend, I'd like to just close things out with you after the credits roll. But let me say thank you on behalf of all the barflies and the beautiful whiskey folk. Thank you for bringing your wisdom, your pragmatism, and your insight again, my friend. It's always a pleasure. Ingvar Ronde.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be back. Cheers.
Slancheva, my friend. As I always say, wonderful stuff. Just great that we could have somebody that's had this place and all our whiskey journeys over the last, well, it's much more than a decade as we worked out from the quiz tonight. It's 17 editions in the Malt Whisky Yearbook. And it's quite interesting to reflect on his decades in whiskey and enjoying whiskey and how he's kind of transcended that FOMO and everything, that he's all about what whiskey can build in terms of connectedness, in terms of distilleries and sense of place and everything, all the history, all of it. So the next time that bottle comes along and you're part of the problem, like me, for 2022, I don't really make resolutions, but I'm certainly going to ask myself twice if I need to buy that bottle, especially if it's one that's in demand. I'm going to build on what I've been building in 2019, 2020, and 2021. I'm going to focus the vPub on 2022 very much about finding the value, the best engagement, the best bang for buck experiences, so that we can all continue to share whiskey together and enjoy it the way that we've been enjoying it over the last few years. I'll raise this glass and say thank you for your attendance tonight. I had a blast tonight, like always, and I look forward to hanging out with you next week to talk about more fun whiskey topics. You're all very, very dearly loved. I look forward to seeing you next week. Sláinte mhath.